We begin in the shadow of a lie. In the vale of Hebron, a father is mourning a son who is not dead. The scripture records Jacob's reaction to the bloody coat with stark finality, and all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. This refusal is significant. Jacob was a man of faith, a prince with God, yet here we see him plunged into a grief so absolute that it bordered on despair. He declared, "I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." Why such utter hopelessness? The chain of truth suggests that Jacob viewed this tragedy not just as an accident, but as a divine judgment. He remembered his own deception of his father Isaac with goat skins. Now, seeing the blood-stained coat, he likely felt that his past sins were hunting him down. The deceiver was deceived, and the weight of it crushed his spirit. For 20 years, the shadow of this grief hung over the camp. The Bible tells us he mourned for his son many days, a Hebrew idiom implying a duration of years. While the sons of Leah and the concubines carried the secret of their guilt, the father carried the burden of his loss, unaware that the hand of God was already moving to redeem it. While Jacob mourned in Hebron, Joseph was walking south. The caravan of Ishmaelites was traveling the ancient trade route toward Egypt. The source material invites us to look closely at the internal state of this 17-year-old boy. He was not yet the stoic ruler of Egypt. He was a terrified teenager. Bitterly, he wept at thought of that loving father in his loneliness and affliction. As the hills of his childhood faded from view, the reality of his situation set in. He was passing from the protection of a prince to the bondage of a slave. The chain of truth notes a profound psychological shift here. Joseph realized that he was unprepared. Accustomed to the tenderness of his father's care, he felt that he was unprepared to cope with the difficulties before him. He had been a petted child. The coat of many colors had set him apart, but it had also fostered faults. The source material notes he was becoming self-sufficient and exacting. The pit and the chains were the harsh cure for his pride. It was there, in the silence of the desert, that the transformation began. The dreamer had to become the beloved of God. Joseph remembered the lessons of his mother, Rachel. He remembered the stories of the God of Bethel, the God who appeared to fugitives. The text records this pivot point. He then and there gave himself fully to the Lord. This was not a passive resignation. It was a high resolve. He prayed that the keeper of Israel would be with him in the land of exile. He decided that even if he spent the rest of his life as a slave, he would act as a subject of the King of Heaven. One day's experience had been the turning point in Joseph's life. Its terrible calamity had transformed him from a petted child to a man. He walked into the desert a boy. He would walk out of it a man of spiritual steel. The caravan crossed from the wilderness into the land of Ham. Egypt in this era was the most highly civilized nation on earth. It was a land of colossal architecture, immense wealth, and deep learning. But for a Hebrew shepherd, it was also a land of moral darkness. The sources tell us that the story of Joseph reflects the Egypt of that day with absolute accuracy. This was a land where the worship of false gods was surrounded by all the pomp of royalty. To a young man raised in the simplicity of tents, the sensory overload of Egypt, the gold, the temples, the vice, was an assault on the soul. Joseph was brought to the slave market. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. This title is specific. Potiphar was not a common soldier. He was a high-ranking official, the chief executioner or head of the royal bodyguard. Joseph was placed immediately into the center of Egyptian power and idolatry. In the house of Potiphar, Joseph began at the bottom, but he did not stay there. The scripture says, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man." We must be careful here. The source material clarifies that this prosperity was not the result of a direct miracle. It wasn't magic. It was the result of industry, care, and energy crowned with the divine blessing. Joseph worked. He did not spend his time brooding over his injustice. He did not act like a victim. He performed his duties with cheerful alacrity. There is a vital lesson at play. Character is not inherited. It is formed. Joseph's success was not because he was Abraham's great-grandson. It was because, in the midst of heathenism, he maintained his connection with God. The discordant notes of vice and revelry often fell upon his ear, but he would not allow his thoughts to linger for a moment upon forbidden subjects. Potiphar was an idolater, but he was not blind. He saw something in his Hebrew slave that defied explanation. Genesis 39:3. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Potiphar realized that his own wealth was increasing for Joseph's sake. This is a fulfillment of the promise given to Abraham. "I will bless them that bless thee." Even this Egyptian captain was receiving the overflow of the covenant blessing because he treated the son of the covenant well. The result was total trust. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. Joseph was no longer treated as a slave, but as a son. He learned the language, the science, and the administration of Egypt. He was being educated for a future he could not yet see. As we close this chapter, look at the contrast. In Canaan, the father is consumed by grief, deceived by his sons, believing a lie. The camp is shadowed by a secret sin. In Egypt, the son is stripped of his coat, but clothed in integrity. He is a slave, yet he is free in spirit. Joseph has risen from the pit to the palace of the captain. He is young, handsome, and powerful. Genesis 39:6 notes, Joseph was a goodly person and well-favored. But as any student of Scripture knows, such a description is often a prelude to danger. Joseph has conquered the trial of adversity. Now he faces a far more dangerous test, the trial of prosperity. The new man has been formed. But can he stand when the fire gets hot? Join us in Part 6, Tested in the Palace, where the integrity of the prince is assaulted by the passion of Potiphar's wife, and the chain of truth is tested by the question, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?